Very good morning, dear children. Dear children, in the previous module, we have started the chapter 4 of history, that is tribals, decus, and the vision of a golden age. So, children, in that we discussed how did these tribal groups they live. Some of the tribal groups they did the jhum cultivation. Some tribal groups they were hunters and gatherers, and some were the herders. Fine, they used to herd animals, they used to herd and rear animals. And children, some were the settled cultivators. Fine. And we discussed that the British officials they call these settled tribal groups as more civilized than the rest. Fine. Now we will start with how did colonial rule affect the tribal lives. Till now we have just studied about their tribal life, how they were living, how they were earning their livelihood. And now we are going to discuss that how the colonial rule, how the British rule affected the life of these tribal people. Fine. Now what happened to the tribal chiefs? Now we discuss that these tribes they were having their heads, their chiefs. Fine. Now what happened to them? What was the problem with those chiefs? Just see. Now before the arrival of the British, children, these tribal chiefs they were very important people. Fine. And they had economic powers, and they were having the right to administer, and they had control over their territories. Fine. In some places they even had their police, and they decided the local rules of the land or the forest management. So they had the rules also in the forest management. But when it came under the British rule, their functions, their powers, means whose I am talking about, the tribal chiefs, they changed considerably. The Britishers allowed them to keep their land titles same way as they were having over the cluster of villages, and they can rent out their lands as well. But if we talk about their administrative power, children, they were forced to follow the laws which were made by the British officials. They cannot, make their own laws. Moreover, they had to pay tribute to the British people, and they had to maintain the discipline in the tribal group on behalf of British. So now they were working under the British. Now they totally lost their authority, which they were enjoying in their earlier times. So this way, and even they were not able to fulfill their traditional functions as well. So this happened to the tribal chiefs. Now if you talk about the shifting cultivators, now what happened, the British were uncomfortable with these tribal people, those who were moving from one place to another, and those who were doing shifting cultivation. Why? Because the British thought that it is really hard to control these sort of groups. So what they do, they wanted the tribal people to settle down, and so that they can become a peasant cultivator, because settled peasants they were easily controlled and administered by the British, whereas they were those who were on the move always. Fine. Now the British they wanted regular revenues. As you know that they were money minded, they just came here to earn more and more profits. So if they will not settle at one place, the British will not get regular revenues. So they introduced land settlements, which meant that they measured the land and they gave the rights of each individual to the land. Fine, this is your land and you have to do cultivation on this land. And they fixed the revenue demand for the state as well. Now some peasants they were declared as the landowners, and whereas the others they were the tenants for them. Fine. So they were working on rent on their land. Fine. Now the landowner used to collect the rent from the tenant, and then they had to give to the state, the revenue to the state. Now the British effort to settle down these jhum cultivators, it was not very successful, children. Why? Because settled plough cultivation was not very easy in the areas where the water was in scarcity, where there was water scarcity and the soil was dry. So how could they earn their livelihood? So the jhum cultivators, they were suffering a lot, fine, as they were not having so much of produce. So these jhum cultivators in the northeast India, they insisted, they stop they continued with their traditional practices, and they protested against the British for all this, and ultimately the British allowed them to carry on shifting cultivation in some parts of the forest. Now children, now the British, they made the forest laws and their impact. So what forest laws they made and what was their impact, that we are going to discuss now. Fine. Now the life of the tribal group, you have seen it was directly connected with the forest. Fine. So whatever change took place in the forest law, it affected the tribal lives a lot. Fine. So now the British, they extended their control over all the forest, and they declared that the forests are the property of the state now. Now they classified some of the forest as the reserved forest, because they produce timber and the British wanted the timber. So that's why they called some of the forest as the reserved forest. Now they in these forests, these people, the jhum cultivators, they were not free to move, and they were not you know allowed to practice jhum cultivation. They cannot collect fruit, they cannot hunt animals. Now you tell me, how would they survive? Everything is banned for them now. Even they were forced, these people, they were forced to move out of the forest in search of work and livelihood. Now even the British stopped these tribal people from living inside the forest, and that was also a problem for them. Now the British also faced a problem. Their forest department was not getting labor to cut the trees for the railway sleepers and how to transport the logs from one place to another. So they were not getting the labor now. Now the colonial officials, they came up with a solution. They took out one solution. What was that solution? That they decided that they should give jhum cultivators a small patch of land in the forest, and they will be doing cultivation on that. But that cultivation will be on one condition. And what will be that condition? The condition will be that they'll be providing labor to the forest department whenever they will be requiring. So many regions of the forest department were established as forest villages, just to ensure the regular supply of cheap labor. Fine. Now children, still many tribal groups, they reacted against the colonial forest laws. They disobeyed the rules. They continued the same practices which were declared illegal, and even they opened rebellion also. So such examples are Sangram Sangma in 1906. It was a revolt in Assam. Then the forest satyagraha in 1930s. It was a revolt in central provinces, that is the Madhya Pradesh area. Now children, there was one more problem, and that problem was with the trade. So during the 19th century, these tribal groups, they found the traders and the money lenders, they started coming into the forest very often. Why they were coming to the forest regularly? Because they wanted to buy the forest produce. Fine. They were offering cash loans to these people, and they were asking them to work for wages for them. Fine. So it took tribal groups some time to understand the consequences of what was happening. Now in the starting, they were not able to understand what was happening, but after some time they understood why they were coming regularly. Now what happened now? Just we will see the case of silk growers. In the 18th century, the Indian silk was very much demanded in the European markets because it was of very fine quality, and it was highly valued and exported from India, and its export increased rapidly. The market expanded. East India Company officials tried to encourage skill silk production to meet their growing demands. So this company was doing the trade. Now what happened? Hazaribagh, which is in present day Jharkhand, was an area of Santals, a tribal group, and they used to rear the cocoons. Now the traders were dealing with these. They were sending their agents, they were giving loans to the tribal people, they were collecting the cocoons from them. The growers were just paid 3 to 4 rupees for 1,000 cocoons, whereas when they were exported to the Bardwan or Gaya, fine, there they were sold at 5 times the price, means just multiply it with 5. Fine. So what was happening, the middleman was getting a lot of profit, fine, but they were arranging the deals between the exporter and the silk grower. They were making profit, but the silk grower, they were not earning profit, they were earning a very little profit. So understandably, then after that, many tribal groups, they saw these markets and traders as their main enemies. They get to know afterwards the search for work. Now these tribal people who had to go far away from their homes in search of work, their condition was also very worst. From the late 19th century, tea plantations started coming up, and mining also became a very important industry. Tribals were recruited in large number to work in the tree plantations, that is in Assam, as well as in the gold mines in the Jharkhands. Fine, they were recruited by the contractors and they were getting very low wages. Even children, they were not letting these laborers to return home. Fine. So this was the condition of the laborers. Now a closer look. Now in the starting of the chapter, we talked about the Birsa Munda. Fine. So though through the 19th and 20th century, the tribal groups of different parts of the country, they rebelled. Fine, for what all changes were there, the restrictions were there. So they rebelled a lot. The new taxes they had to pay, all these were the problems. Now the exploitation by the traders and the money lenders. So they were rebelling for this. The coal rebels in 1831-32. Fine, it took place. Then Santhal rose a revolt in 1855. Then Bastar rebellion, it was in the central India, it broke out in 1910. Warli revolt in Maharashtra, that is in 1940. Now a movement that Birsa led was one such movement. We will talk about one such movement, that was Birsa Munda's movement, and these movements were the examples. So many movements took place. Now Birsa Munda, he was born in the mid 1870s. He was a son of a very poor father, and he grew around the forest of Bahoda grazing sheep. Fine, so his they used to graze sheep, and they used to plow flute. He used to play the flute as well, and he used to dance in the local akharas. Fine. Now there was a lot of poverty, so the father used to move from one place to another in the search of work. Fine. When he was a teenager, that time Munda herds, tales of appraising the past, and saw the leaders of the community urging the people to revolt. So his upbringing was done in such a time when everybody was revolting against. They talk of a golden age when Munda has been free of the oppression of Dikus, and said there would be a time. Now he used to listen all these tales about the golden period and when the community will be restored with all what they had previously. So they used to see themselves as the descendants of the original settlers of the region. So they were fighting for their land, Mulki Larai, and they were reminding people to the need to win back their kingdom. Now Birsa, he went to a local missionary school, and there in sermons he used to listen to the sermons of the missionaries, Christian missionaries. Fine. Now there too he heard that it is possible for the Mundas to attain their kingdom again, and whatever rights they have lost. But for that, what they had to do, if they became good Christians and they give up their bad practices, then only they can get all this. Fine. So afterwards, the Birsa, he went to a prominent Vaishnav preacher also. There he wore the sacred thread, and to he began to learn the value of importance of purity and piety. Fine. Now Birsa was deeply influenced by many of the ideas, whatever ideas which he heard or which he saw. So he was very much moved by these ideas. Fine. His movement was aimed at reforming tribal society. He just wanted to reform the tribal society. He urged the Mundas to give up drinking liquor, clean their village, and stop believing in witchcraft and sorcery. Fine. He said, stop all this. This is all not good. Fine. But we must remember that the Birsa also turned against missionaries and Hindu landlords, and he was against the missionaries as well as the Hindu landlords. He saw them as outside forces which were ruining the Munda way of life. So he was looking them as outsiders which were destroying the life of the Mundas. Fine. In 1895, what happened? Birsa urged his followers to recover their glorious past. He talked about golden age, and he talked about Satyug, the age of truth. When Mundas lived a very good, he used to just remind them that how you used to live and how you are living now. Fine. They did not kill the brethren and relatives. They lived in honesty. Birsa also wanted people to once again work on their land, settle down, and cultivate their fields. So he just reminded them about their past. Fine. What worried British officials was that the political aim of the Birsa movement. What was it? It was to drive out the missionaries, moneylenders, Hindu landlords, and the government, and they want to set up the Munda Raj at Birsa, under the Munda Raj, with the Birsa as their head. Fine. So this movement was identified. All these forces, the cause of misery, the Mundas were suffering. So they wanted this movement. Fine. The land policies of the British were destroying their traditional land system. Obviously, Hindu landlords and money lenders, they were taking over their lands, and the missionaries were criticizing their traditional culture. So this is the reason why they wanted to throw all of them out. As the movement spread, the British officials decided to act. Now when it was becoming very popular, so that time the British acted. What did they do? They arrested Birsa in 1895. They convicted him with the charges of riots and jailed him for 2 years. Fine. After 2 years, when he was released, he again started with the gathering support of the people, and he used traditional symbols like language of rouse people. He used to urge people to destroy Ravan. So who was the Ravan here? The Dikus and the Europeans, and they wanted to establish a kingdom under the leadership of Birsa. Fine. Birsa was targeting the symbols of Dikus and European parts. They attacked their police station, churches, raided their properties of the money lenders and zamindar. They raised a white flag as the symbol of Birsa Raj. In 1900, Birsa died because of cholera, and the movement after his death was faded out. However, this movement was not very successful, but it was successful in two ways. What were the ways? The first was It forced the colonial government to introduce laws so that the land of the tribal could not be easily taken over by the Dikus. So this law was made. Secondly, again it shows once again that the tribal people, they had the capacity to protest against whatever injustice they face, find their anger, they express their anger against the colonial rule. So they did this in their own specific way. They invented their own rituals and symbols for struggle, children. So this was the end of the topic. Thank you and have a nice day.